Welcome, 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 boys and girls. It's Aunt March once again. We're going to continue our topic of women in history. And today we're going to study about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She decided that the best pathway for her was to become a lawyer so that she could help fight injustices against women. Women were not being treated well. So she went to law school, and her husband also was in law school. She met him in law school. His name was Martin. And they both studied really, really hard. Ruth was only one of a very few women in law school. In fact, in her class of 500, there were only, guess how many women? Only 9 women. And the teachers, the professors, didn't even want the women to be there. And the men didn't want the women to be there. In fact, the teachers, professors would try to embarrass the women by asking like really impossible or really, really difficult questions. And then all of the men would just laugh at the women. That wasn't right, was it? Well, even the head of the law school had a problem with the women being there. He invited them all for a special dinner. And so the women were thinking, oh, well, maybe now we're going to feel accepted. But you know what he asked them at the dinner? He wanted to know why they were taking up space that men should be in. Can you imagine how they felt? Asking why they were there and taking up space that men should have? That was very rude and cruel, wasn't it? But you know what? That did not discourage Ruth or the other women. They continued to study hard, even though they were discriminated against in many ways while they were in law school. One time they had an assignment to do, and Ruth went over to the library to a special room where the pre-law students could get their journals. And she asked if she could have a certain journal, and the clerk said, you can't come in here. And she said, why? He said, because you're a woman and women are not allowed in here. And then she said, well, could you at least bring the journal out to me so that I can get the information? And unfortunately, he said no. Again, she did not let this discourage her at all. She continued to study hard. And despite all the unfair treatment that she and the women went through, Ruth graduated at the very top of her class. Even though she had been at the top of her class and she now graduated and she was a lawyer, boys and girls, she could not get a job as a lawyer. Again, men discriminated against women being lawyers and high professionals at this time, so she had to settle for being a clerk. She also became a teacher at the law school. And because of Ruth, more and more women became interested in taking law. And one day, some of the women came to Ruth and they asked her, could you teach a class on law and women? So Ruth considered this, and she looked for material, and she could hardly find anything about law and women. So Ruth did that research herself, and she put together a course called Women and Law. Again, all these things are happening to her, but she doesn't let this discourage her. She divided her time between helping other people and teaching, because again, she had the desire to help women that were being mistreated. She developed a project where lawyers would fight for women's rights about in the workplace that they worked with their employers. And you know, at that time, if you were married and you were pregnant and you did get a job out someplace, as soon as the boss found out that you were pregnant, he could fire you. And girls that were interested in sports that boys did, that wasn't happening during that time. So there were many unfair rulings about hiring women and promoting them. And so this is the task that Ruth took on. Sometimes she won cases. Sometimes she lost, but she kept on going. Finally, the Supreme Court had to admit that rulings that dealt with treatment of men and women differently was unconstitutional. It was illegal, and Ruth was the one that brought this to the forefront. In one case, Ruth quoted this saying by Sarah Grimke, who was a famous fighter for women's rights. She said, I ask no favor for women, All I ask of our brothers is to take their feet off our necks. Thank you." Well, when she quoted that, nobody said anything. It was quiet in the court. And it took another 5 years for the judges to actually come to a verdict, and they agreed with Ruth. The vote was 8 yay and 1 nay. This was a landmark victory for women, that they had to be treated equally in the workplace. Ruth argued for fairness and won. Ruth took on many cases, not only for women, but some for men as well, boys and girls. She was all about fighting for injustices. It was President Jimmy Carter that invited Ruth to be a part of the United States Court of Appeals. So no longer in the lawyer position, she was a judge now. And then after Jimmy Carter, we had President Bill Clinton, that invited her to serve in the highest office possible in law, and that was to be a member of the Supreme Court. Now that Ruth had become the second woman in the Supreme Court, you know what they had to do? They finally had to get a restroom just for the women that they didn't have before. Wow. Ruth worked hard, always working for the underdog, always working for those cases where people were treated unjustly, men and women. She didn't always win her cases. Sometimes all she could do was dissent, which meant she was just letting everybody, she's saying, "I want it to be on record that I am against this injustice." And that happened to her more than once. But she continued to fight so that women especially would be treated fairly. There was a case that she took, boys and girls, where a woman after 20 years complained that she had not been treated fairly because she found out after 20 years that the men were making a lot more money than she was for the same job. So, boys and girls, Ruth, she made it a point to make sure that this would not happen again. So she continued to speak against this. And we found that when Barack Obama became president, he passed a law, and it was called the Fair Pay Act, that women could sue and win if they were treated unfairly as far as wages are concerned. Boys and girls, the fight's not over. Even though Ruth Bader Ginsburg is no longer with us, she has passed away, the fight continues for fairness. I wonder if God will choose you to be a blessing to someone to fight for injustices. Don't forget, study hard, because we don't know what God has in store for you. Stay tuned for the rest of our program as we celebrate Women's History Month.